I decided to use two examples from my country that has been recently completed or that are going to be completed this year to show you how a Renaissance organ is mirroring also the present time. So what you see is the organ of Olkusz, and that's one of the cities that are associate partners of ECHO, so I can say it's my organ. And also Peter van Dijk was very heavily involved in the construction of this object. I think one of the best preserved late Renaissance organs that we have. But before we go to that, I just wanted to... No, I can do it. Thank you. I just want to tell you what kind of plan I'm going to have for this presentation. So first, we are going briefly, very briefly, to discuss the role of the organ in the modern society, which is a topic that one could consider something very open, and everybody, again, is going to have his own view on that. Then, two scenes from the modern time. A restoration of the original organ in the late Renaissance period, and there are going to be interesting connection to that object, a very strong Swedish connection, for instance. And then a different approach, a new organ in a Renaissance style, then a very short conclusion, which is going to consist of probably one sentence. And all of that, I mean, all of the middle part is going to be concentrated just in one region, in my region, in my hometown, actually, in Krakow, and around it. So we are going to explore just one tradition, but of several periods. And yes, oh, sorry, it's not very sharp, but that's St. Mary's in Krakow. That's one of the 5 large Gothic churches, the main one. And of course, if one would wish to think about this topic, that could be a question mark, one must state that our societies, also in my country, have been or are at the present point in a process of deep changes to the confessional structure. I mean, there is less and less interest in the strictly, I would say, ecclesiastical aspect of life. And this is partly connected to the process of aging of our population, which is, of course, something very normal. It's biology, and it's something that we cannot obviously avoid. But this has very serious consequences also, for instance, for the numbers of people attending the Mass. And we know that there is less and less, and this process has been actually completed in some of the countries. In others, in Europe, it's not as advanced. But for instance, in my country, where the population declared, let's say 10 years ago, that approximately 95% would be practicing the faith by means of visiting the Mass or service, it changed rapidly so that we have now approximately 30% less. So it is going to continue. And this implies, of course, the necessity to think about different musical functions of an organ than those strictly connected to the religious life and the aspect of liturgy and worship. And this is why probably we also meet regularly within the ADs of the ECHO, and everybody's having this in mind. So at the very end of the day, the organ is still an organ, and it is going to play organ music. So what can we do with that? If we use live electronics and choreography and light installation and silent films and I mean, the possibilities are, of course, endless. At the end of the day, we still have to use the organ as a musical instrument. I just leave it open. So, as I say, the response to this would be that organ societies are being founded and created, and they try to find alternative concepts of usage of an organ, and they try to surround the Objects Review initiative. It's all obvious, so I'm not going to continue that. I just wanted that it somehow resonates in this room. Yes, and now we go to the first example, which is actually mirroring the present era very well, since it is very characteristic to the modern time, especially the second half of the 20th century, that one would have a philologically clean approach to restore a historic organ. Not to modernize it, but just to restore. And this has been done in this place, actually, twice. Exactly as it has been the case in many European cities, the greatest organs have been restored and re-restored, sometimes for the second and for the third time, always searching for a more accurate interpretation of the sources. So let's talk about the history of this place. It's a very small city, located approximately 35 kilometers from Krakow. Krakow is the old capital city, which was moved then to Warsaw. I mean, the capital was moved to Warsaw by the first of our Vasa kings, Sigismund I, with whom whom we also owe the personal union with Sweden, because he was for 10 years also your king at a certain point of time. And this place, I mean, the city is interesting because it used to be the main source for lead and for silver in what was then the first Polish Republic. And they would just mine the lead, and because the lead would be in common deposits with silver, actually it would be the byproduct of the mining of silver. And this lead and silver would then go to the river of Wisła, which is the main river, starting somewhere in the mountains in the south and finishing in Gdańsk in Danzig. And by the way, the graffiti are from the 60s, so it's not ancient. It's not ancient. And somehow, in the best time of this city, they decided around 1611 to have a new organ made. And of course, the instrument reflected its own era, its own time. It was a mirror of its time. And this would be the case in many aspects, because not only the monarch would be personally involved in some aspects of this construction. He was a great music lover, and you can read about it, for instance, in Grundlage einer Ehrenpforte by Matteson. There's a description of his court chapel, and he would be, so to say, collecting the musicians, basically from many countries. So in his court chapel you would have the Sweeling pupil Paul Siefert as one of the organists. The other one would be Tarquinio Merula. Luca Marenzo would be his Kapellmeister for 3 years, and so on. So he was personally involved, but also one person founded the lead privately. More than 2/3 of the lead was given by one of the merchants who would be just trading with that material. And the project was somehow ambitious. We are informed exceptionally well about what really happened, because we have still the complete books with all the expenses for the organ, since the very beginning to the last day, to the final examination. And if we have that young Ukrainian artist who played for us, maybe it would please him to hear that one of those books was, and they still preserved in one of the libraries of Leuven in the Ukraine. Yes. So they wanted to have an organ made by an organ builder who came from the south, from the city of Nuremberg. His name was Hans Hummel. He originated from a very old family of organ and instrument makers, and he would be educated by the Kunz family. And the Kunz family would consist of the 3 brothers, Wolfgang, Johannes and Steffen. They would reside in Krakow and partly in Nuremberg. And just to give you some links, it was Steffen Kunz who educated Nikolaus Manderscheid. So that's the connection. But the process was exceptionally lengthy of building of this organ, and unfortunately, exactly 400 years before we had our pandemics, the corona, there was also an epidemic here in Olkusz. And the organ builder lost his son. And you can read, there is a small table, and under the organ it's in Polish and in Latin, and the first words are, "I have buried my son under my organ, the master from Nuremberg, Hans Hummel," and so on. The organ survived the ages, actually, with almost no changes. The first restoration was in the 70s, and that's how it looked after the first works were carried out. Then it was restored by Flentrop. It was finished in 2018. That's the result of that. I will show you the stock list. But what's interesting and what is really mirroring that time, the 70s, was that the restoration was carried out by a then completely isolated company from Krakow, which was state-owned. They restored approximately 40 organs, and they really did excellent documentation. So this organ has like 10 or 12 volumes of documentation with dozens of drawings. Everything has been measured very well. So when we were restoring the object, we had already some material that could be used. But, of course, as a mirror of our present time, there was a serious problem that you can see. It was the corrosion of the pipes. So this was actually the direct inspiration for the works, and it's exactly the same situation that we have right now in Leuven, for instance, because the Stellwagen is going to be restored again. So this is really a problem of our present era. It was not completely absent 400 years ago. They also had to deal with that, but perhaps some changes to the climate, to the general environment, did really imply that this process started going faster and faster. And just to show you some of the drawings, I mean, they are really quite perfect, huge format, like 3 of these tables. The action was drawn, the wing chest, I mean, basically everything. And the restoration was quite careful. I mean, what was lost has been replaced. This organ is special in many respects, but I would risk to say that you will not find an organ from this type, of this size, that would have not only the original wing chests, but also, I mean all the wing chests, but also original actions. It has completely original actions, and I think 25 or 31 stops are still historic. That's the repositive of the reconstructed reeds, that's the 2-foot Rohrflöte, which is soldered up to the smallest pipe, and this is part of the action, yes. But it also has some very special wing chests that you would know perhaps from the Habsburg circles, and they have what the German people call Lamellen, Lamellenlade, which means that within the tone channels you have separations made for every single stop, and that would be something which would be made in the region actually until almost the 1700s. Yes, and now let's go to the stop list, which is highly interesting. So the stops which are marked with plus are completely or mostly original. What was lost were just the reeds. So you can see that this idea of a blockwork is actually gone. It's completely gone. In 1611 already, you have separate ranks of stops. Of course, the mixtures are rather large, but still, I mean, you can get a lot of individual stops, I mean, sounds from the organ. And the stop list was designed to provide the maximum of contrast, because you have huge, I mean, flutes of great scale. The great chimney flute has 20 centimeters for the bottom C, and we have exceptionally high. It's the cornet tone, like in Hamburg. And then at the same time, you have the oldest playable Salitional that I know from 1611 of the grade, which is lead. It's inverted conical. One should perhaps say that there would be even older examples, because this stop was really standard in the East. The oldest example is from 1565. It's still in existence, and it would belong to every organ in that region, also quite early on in Sweden. Yes, so the restoration, one could say, reflects the present idea, the present, as I said, philologically clean and correct approach, and this organ had to be surrounded with initiatives. So there was an organ society, and of course activities with children, and recitals and concerts, chamber music, new music, and so on. Alright, so restoration is one scene from the mirroring of the present era. Now, second approach. This is the Benedictine monastery in Tyniec. It's actually part of Krakow. It was founded in this year, 1044, so it's quite ancient. And you can see, I mean, the city is somewhere here. It's a big city, 1 million people at present, but it is surrounded by monasteries. This is one of them, that's it. Another one, so if you would look from above, you would find an interesting next of that. And this church used to have a very interesting organ, this one, which was located in the choir. And these photographs were made before the monks themselves in 1940 decided to remove most of the interior because they had this concept to modernize, to clean up the interior of the church. So they just dismantled this organ. What was known, yes, and unfortunately it was removed in a way that almost nothing is left. You only have these 3 photographs and some remarks in the archives, not very clear. It is also known that when they dismantled the organ, on the central pipe there was an inscription found that was made by a certain Mr. Jan Głowinski from Krakow. He belonged to a very old family, 1691, so everybody believed that this organ was really a late 17th century object. And approximately 10 years ago, or maybe 12 years ago, the monks started recreating the interior, the mobilities, so to say, within the interior. They discovered that some paintings are still hidden in the attic, maybe some parts migrated to different places, and they started recreating step by step the interior. And then they came up with this idea, why don't we actually recreate this organ about which we know almost nothing? They thought, as I said, that it was made by Mr. Głowinski, and that was the first idea, just to have an organ in that style. But quickly it turned out that it would be just repeating of something that's already in existence, because of that builder we still have other instruments, and this one has been just restored and partly reconstructed by Wegscheider. You have the bellows, and you have again those drum pipes, 3 on the left side and 2 on the left and 3 on the right side. And there is also a very big organ by him, a huge, actually, a 16-foot organ with an 8-foot positive. And in the side naves you have 2 smaller organs by him. One, I was thinking of a more ambitious project of the time. So it would not be really reasonable to copy something that's already in existence. And then it turned out that they found some pieces of the historic organ case from Tinnitz. And to be precise, some parts of the top of the case, some profiles, and what they did was a C14 analysis, which is of course the isotope of carbon, and they did the dendrochronology, and what it turned out was that the wood is much older than they thought. It was fallen approximately in 1540. So they started developing an idea to think about a Renaissance organ about which they knew basically nothing. Not a single stop was known from its stop list, and also the feeling was that perhaps the archives will not provide enough material. So they did research. Several people were involved into that, and they came up with an interesting idea, not to copy all of the ornaments of the case which were added at the end of the 16th century, but just to create a more or less free interpretation of a Renaissance organ, so a completely different approach than in Olmos, where you had substance and you were bound by a historic object. And they decided to try to search for an organ that could be copied and put into the existing borders of a case which was determined by the photogrammetric analysis. And they came up with this very interesting instrument, which was, it's also the same region. It was built between 1580 and 1600. And if you just have a look on the photograph, you can immediately see that many aspects of this organ case are completely different than in Olmos. The geometry of the pipes is completely different. And also the materials chosen, the scalings, the type of the wind chest is very different. So they helped to document this instrument. They just financed the documentation, which was done by Markus Stahl from Dresden. And this organ, exactly as the Van Covelens organ in Alkmaar, has a Bohlenladen, which means that the chests, these are the drawings of Markus Stahl, which means that the chests are not made as a frame with separations glued into the frame, but they are just made of several larger pieces of wood, and the tone channels are drilled. And by the way, the pedal chest has the pallets which are opening to the side, like that, which is quite unique. So this was the main reference for the pipework, for the wind chest, but there was more, of course. There is another organ, this one, from approximately 1560. The front pipes are not original, but it still has the same type of the chest. And there was another reference for this kind of wind chest, which is this organ. It's the same region. It's 1620, so actually the very end, the very last period of the Renaissance, but again, the other time. And technically, the organ is still in a very original shape. The pipes were partly, the stops were partly changed in 1780 and then at the end of the 19th century. So you have a large Hauptwerk with 13 stops, a big Rhythmusstick with 11, and a huge pattern division with 13 stops again on 2 wind chests. And this organ has also been restored by the same company that worked in Olkusz. It was one of the first projects. So you have more than 200 drawings of this organ of sorry. Yes. Well, that's not interesting. It is, but not of this quality, actually. So it's very well documented, and you can see that the pedal chests have drilled tone channels. Yes. It actually looks, I would say, very northern, the organ itself. It could be the organ by Scherer, but we are in the southeast Poland, almost on the border with the Belarus. It's very far away. So we see that the context and the inspirations probably have had a long journey. Yes. So the original case was documented photogrammatically so that the size could be determined. And the stop list is inspired, actually it's almost one-to-one, the Renaissance organ of Złoty, the first one from approximately 1580. And it looks like this. It's an F organ. And there is also one of the earliest salicionals, which is also copied from that instrument. So, because it's an F organ, just to go back to one of the questions, all of the markings of the pitch are based on 3 and so on. And there are also 2 pedal stops, almost like alpha. And there was that feeling that this organ, the stop list of Złoty Potok, which would end here with no reeds, could be expanded by 1 stop perhaps. They wish to have a reed. And we inspired ourselves by 3 examples of a reed standing in facade. So this one is in Gdansk, in the Holy Trinity Church. It's a project very much like what you intend to do in Leuven. It was an organ from 1618, of which some 50% of the case was preserved. And then a colleague just was able to initiate a process of a, let's say, more or less strict reconstruction. And then you have this Regal, which was, I think, based on Lüdingbot. Then there is another organ, also a Krakow region, a tiny positive made by one of the Kunz brothers, and it has it's 1600. And it has an original Regal made of brass over here. Just, it's tiny. Almost all of the resonators are the same length. And of course, the Olkusz organ, which has the cornet 2-foot, the pedal reed, standing in facade between the feet of the principal 16. Yes. So basically, a new organ that should somehow be inspired by original examples from the region, so they are not very far from what might have stood in this monastery church. And we're not pretending that we are reconstructing some kind of an instrument that would be really present. And now the steps of the construction. It's almost ready. So of course, casting on sand, and there was a very special alloy which was used in Złoty Potok, because it's not only lead, it has almost 1% of copper in it, which is not easy to combine because of the different melting temperature. And then you have the chests, which are copied from Złoty Potok, more or less. I mean, the size, of course, is slightly different. That's the pedal chest for cornet 2 and posaune. It's very special shapes of the pallets. This is the Regal made of brass, which is going to be just in front of the organ. this is the keyboard, also based on local examples. An F organ, so the classic Renaissance compass, pedalboard, and the bellows with multiple folds, 6 to be precise. The reeds, I mean, this was a very interesting task because there's one organ from the very early 17th century which has still 3 original reed stops, so we just copied the bell reeds from this organ. It's exactly the same region, not the same organ builder, and the shallots look, I would say, very much like in your country, so it must have been a rather universal idea to have open and rounded brass shallots at the time, and it wouldn't also be very different at that time in Italy. Hermann's May is the same. In northern Germany, Jakob Scherer, and we have still his shallots in Mölln. It's exactly this idea. So something more universal than one would maybe assume. And the special stop, which is, I mean, it's nonsense on paper. It looks like this. It's, as far as I know, only in my country and maybe in Slovakia. It's a symbol that consists of extremely small pipes. You cannot really tell what pitches you can hear. It's just on the border of the possibility to hear something, but it mixes surprisingly well with all of the stops. You can even use it in the planner. Yes, and there is some kind of inspection. Yes, of the parts by the colleagues. It was very cold at the moment, by the way. And this is the chest with drilled tone channels for the grade, and that's the tiny pedal chest. Also, this idea of stops was taken from the drawing. Yes. So, the second approach would mean to try to stay within a certain context, but not to be bound exactly to what you don't know precisely. And now, the last sentence, I promised it's going to be only one. So I would really very much wish that at a certain point of time, the situation matures enough in Leuven so that the authorities and the public would be ready to have the Clinton organ resurrected from the ashes. Not. Thank you very much.